billion. And that will import, well, we're going to import more than we export within 4 years at that rate. Giant avocados are selling first in Britain. Avocados 14 inches in diameter. My goodness, how about that? Large as a watermelon. 8 times the size of a normal avocado. One of them can feed a family of 6. Today's quote worth requoting is by Steve Harvey. He's no relation, by the way, who says the sport he enjoys most is soccer because if you have to stand in line at a concession stand for 40 minutes, you can return to the game and you haven't missed anything. Let me pace this next to accommodate some outdoor loudspeakers in Henning, Illinois. The Farm Progress Show is underway today, and attendees at this year's show are listening to this broadcast on their showgrounds public address system. So this next is for them. A longtime friend of mine is mingling with you all today, Orion Samuelson. Nobody has a wider embrace of American agriculture. Nobody, in or out of government, has a bigger bear hug for all American farmers than does Big Orion Samuelson. Home-based at Chicago's WGN, he regularly feeds hundreds of radio stations in the 9/10 of this country that's still country with an updated source of information relating to American agriculture. You all are aware that the Big O has been honored many, many times with many awards. Well, now he is next going to harvest the ripest apple on the tree. He is to be elected November 8th to the Radio Hall of Fame at the Museum of Broadcast Communication in Chicago, and none could be more deserving. Now, today's For What It's Worth will be comprehended best by our captive audience in Henning, Illinois. For what it's worth, it was a farm boy who was home on leave from military duty. He was home on leave from military duty when his father asked what he thought of Army life, and the lad said, "It's pretty good, Pa. The food is not bad. The work is real easy. But best of all," said the farm boy, "they let you sleep real late in the morning. Pull Harvey." Good day. Still get mighty lost in rugged southwestern Utah. In Jimmy Reed Creek Canyon, a deer hunter was 4 days lost. Spent part of one of those days being stalked by a mountain lion until somebody noticed the orange hunting vest that he'd hung in a tree as a signal, and he was rescued. The 74-year-old deer hunter is entirely well and safe. Rudy Lopez, Sr. In Virginia Beach, Virginia, sniper suspect John Allen Muhammad, into a second day trying to be his own lawyer, has given up. He turned his defense over to professional lawyers. General Motors will begin next month selling 15-passenger vans with equipment which is supposed to offer a degree of stabilization. Those vehicles have tended to roll over. Our Pentagon has a new weapon on its way to Iraq, a defensive weapon, a virtual microphone to help detect where sniper fire is coming from. Politics, President Bush is still the big man on campus. He has the approval of 61% of college students surveyed. On the medical front, the cancer risk appears greater for those who fly a lot. Flight crews have a higher than normal risk of both skin and breast cancer, and the higher we fly, the more we are absorbing of cosmic ionizing radiation. On a related subject, American doctors subject women patients to twice as many tests for breast cancer, twice as many as do British doctors, and yet the American rate for cancer detection is no better than theirs. Our redundant tests are in response to inferior mammogram training and greater fear of malpractice lawsuits. Now, the American College of Surgeons meeting today in Chicago is hearing of a vaccine which appears to prevent the recurrence of cancer. At Walter Reed, women whose cancers had spread to the lymph nodes are responding to this vaccine. One woman, after 5 major surgeries for breast cancer, has had no further relapses following a single pinprick above her knee. The experimental vaccine is derived from tiny bits of tumor protein. It appears entirely safe, no side effects. The new vaccine studies involve women with existing disease. Eventually, the vaccine will be tried on women without cancer. We deliberated not quite long enough. We celebrated too soon. The offer of 10,000 troops from Turkey to help us police Iraq, that troop transfer is on hold because the Kurds in Iraq don't like the idea. From USA Today today, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has taken care to keep his public comments upbeat and encouraging, but in a memo to his own senior staff officials, he says, quote, "We are in Iraq and Afghanistan for a long stay." Page 2. Michigan, burglars were frightened away from the scene of their burglary because of the family's pet cat. The cat was meowing so loudly that the owners of the house were awakened. The family cat awakened everybody, and the family got up and chased the burglar, and he was busted a short time later, but the family dog slept through the whole thing. Move over, Rover. The new guard dog is a cat. In the spotlight, advantage New York. The Yankees now lead the Florida Marlins 2-1. Derek Jeter and Mike Mussina made the difference. President Bush in Bali, focal target of Far East Islamic terrorists. Our president said Americans have deep respect for Muslims. He said that the terrorists who claim Islam as their inspiration defile what he called one of the world's great faiths. I have a copy of a letter sent to the President of the United States from somewhere in Appalachia. It's signed Mike Ryan. I'm going to have to paraphrase it to shrink it, but the essence remains, quote, "Please, Mr. President, attack Appalachia." I'm still quoting from now on until I tell you differently. You, Mr. President, have promised the Iraqis that they will share in the wealth of their oil. We could use some of that sharing here. You promised health care for all Iraqis. We could use some of that health care in Appalachia. You promised to rebuild their schools, Mr. President. Have you seen ours? You'll have no problem finding reasons to attack us. There's a uranium enrichment plant near Piketon, Ohio, in Appalachia. You'll find all sorts of radioactive waste thereabouts. America cannot wait to attack Appalachia until the crisis spreads. It's right now that we have the high unemployment, the poor education, the high pollution, the poor health care, the poor education, the high poverty, the poor leadership, and the poor education. Appalachia is all of West Virginia and most of 11 other states. And we have weapons of mass destruction. All you have to do, Mr. President, is to attack. But please do it soon, because we need the reparations now, and the better infrastructure, and the better health care, and a fair share of the wealth of our resources, and the better schools. Just what you've promised the Iraqis, nothing more. But please, Mr. President, attack Appalachia next. Page 3.
Attention.
Freeway exit in Issaquah, Washington, where the traffic funnels onto Highway 900. A creative panhandler is carrying a sign which reads, "I really need a hug, but cash will do." Shop talk? Few new season television programs have been more heavily promoted than the program Skin and the new season of Joe Millionaire, both of them so-called adult entertainment. Both programs flopped. They drew fewer than 7 million watchers. In Bowling Green, Kentucky, the news on the public radio station is read by Lisa Newton. She is a senior. She reads news very well. It is typed for her in Braille. Lisa Newton is blind, which surprises everyone except Lisa Newton. She says God doesn't give you more than you can handle. In the Pacific Northwest, after 2 torrential rainstorms in 1 week, at Mount Vernon, Washington, that improvised mile-long 6-foot wall of soggy sandbags is holding, by George. It's holding back the surging Skagit River. Northern Maine got its first snowfall yesterday. It could have some slush all over the state by tonight. Hot weather is fanning 4 wildfires in Southern California. At least one was arson, and it has consumed 6 homes in Riverside County. Agribusiness at the University of Illinois. Agronomists thought it would be fun to grow an ear of corn with orange and blue colors. The corn would be colored orange and blue, the school's colors. Well, they failed to do that. The genetically altered corn came out instead an ugly gray-green. However, serendipitously, their research did open the door to the development of corn hybrids with higher levels of vitamin A potential cornucopia for sub-Saharan Africa. Kentucky's new cash crop is shrimp. Big, plump, freshwater Malaysian prawns fed on corn mash left over from Kentucky's distilleries. They're cutting the ribbon today on a facility at Mount Sterling, which will process 5,000 pounds every 10 hours. And now, page 4. There remains room in the sky for fun flying, thanks to the Experimental Aircraft Association of Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Americans who like to fly for fun have not yet been fenced out of all of the sky. Home-built aircraft, a hobby encouraged and disciplined by the EAA. Home-built aircraft are now increasing in numbers faster than factory-built planes. Home-builts are now 25,000, and the number is growing 1,000 a year. Liza Minnelli's estranged husband wants $10 million damages for spousal abuse. He says in her attacks during drunken rages, she left him with what he calls a permanent headache. For what it's worth, Dr. Phil says our nation's #1 health crisis is overweight, and he is coaxing and coaching men and women how to encourage themselves to eat less by buying clothing in smaller sizes. Well, hold the phone, Dr. Phil. Manufacturers of women's clothing have caught on, and they have begun marking down the sizes, having discovered that women will pay more for smaller size garments. They're marking up prices and marking down sizes. It's called vanity sizing, especially in more expensive high-end apparel. Pants listed as size 4 may actually measure at the waist anything from 21 to 34 inches. And people who need a size 6 for the same garment marked size 4 will pay $100 more. Paul Harvey. Good day. British explorer Renault Fiennes, following a near-fatal heart attack, vowed that he would run 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents, 5 down and 2 to go. Cairo today, New York Sunday. Personal spending by Americans increased 1% last July, increased again in August, but personal spending declined in September, down 0.3. Even though personal income was increasing by 0.3, spending was less. If we're paying off debt, good for us. Californians rarely prefer fog and drizzle, but such sure is a welcome sight today. 7 fires are still burning in 4 counties, 745,000 acres now, more than 2,000 homes now. Some Californians staying behind to fight for their threatened homes have armed themselves against looters. A new land management plan for our forests will increase the thinning of dead trees and underbrush. It has cleared the Senate already. The traumatized, displaced children of this firestorm will remember Halloween 2003 forever, when in their shelters this evening they are invited to Halloween parties where the San Diego Padres and Disney and area Walmart stores are providing Halloween costumes and candy and toys and refreshments. Now a deadly snowstorm has slammed into the northern Rockies. Parts of Wyoming and Utah, temperatures suddenly plunged 50 degrees from the 70s to the 20s overnight. Truckers are running out of paved places to pull off. At least 10 big rigs have spun out west of Truckee. I-80 between Nevada and California is closed. A parking garage was under construction in Atlantic City. 10 stories of added parking for Tropicana Casino when the top 5 floors collapsed. Workers ran for their lives as the concrete and the metal bars came crashing down, killed 4, many injured. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, speaking in Atlanta, is said to have predicted that the United States Supreme Court will increasingly base its decisions on international law rather than on the United States Constitution. If you find that utterance inconsistent with what you thought you knew about this Arizona-bred jurist, maybe I'd better run it by again. She said the United States Supreme Court will increasingly base its decisions on international law rather than on the United States Constitution. She is said to have said that this policy would make a good impression on people from other countries. Let us hope that one of her clerks wrote this speech and sought to please a specific audience. Her speech host was the Southern Center for International Studies. The only other acceptable explanation is that she's just been away from home way too long. Now, page 2. Embarrassed again. Quality Planning Corporation calculates risks for insurance companies. Their evaluation of the odds for accidents have to be accurate as possible. And they discover that the people who have the most car accidents are students. Number 1 is students, but second are doctors. And then in this order, attorneys and architects and real estate agents. On the medical front, to examine you inside out, doctors have used small cameras attached to long, flexible tubes. Now, you heard what you're about to hear first on the rest of the story on this network. But the FDA has today approved, and doctors at the University of Iowa are now using this new technology. It's a camera in a pill. A patient swallows an endoscopic capsule no larger than a multivitamin to detect digestive disorders. During its trip through the digestive tract, the camera transmits more than 14,000 images to a belt which the patient wears for 8 hours, and that provides an unprecedented view of the middle portion of the digestive tract. Congress, both House and Senate, after all of the angry rhetoric about our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Congress is giving overwhelming approval to the $87.5 billion the president requested. Some of us hear about another $87 billion to repair damage in Iraq, and we grow impatient for the lawmakers who could, but do not, allocate even one of those billions to spur the development of other kinds of fuel. Wilhelm Heather and Helfrich Heather of Baltimore County are weary of waiting. They know their car burns blended diesel at less cost, and it's a less toxic exhaust, so they've adapted their home heating now. So the furnace burns a biodiesel fuel made of homegrown soybeans. In nearby Taylorsville and Westminster, there are already Shell stations selling biodiesel fuel. Ironically, some government agencies are using it but not sharing it. Someday we're gonna look back on the dinosaurs that we have been driving for 100 years on gasoline because oil was so cheap. But at $87 billion, it's not cheap anymore. For all of the anguish in Israel, her scholars continue to reward the world. Rehoboth, of course, and now an Israeli startup company called Lenset has developed a processor that uses optics instead of silicon, intended to enable a computer to compute at the speed of light. Optical processing, a Bunyan stride forward in the development of digital hardware. Imagine processing at the speed of light. Eventuates in safer airports, autonomous military systems, high-definition multimedia broadcasting, a whole new generation of communication. A computer that can compute at the speed of light would process 8 million operations a second, 1,000 times faster than today's fastest. And Lenset expects to market the new processor within months. Page 3.
They say the best thing...
Sotheby's auction, a vampire killing kit. A vampire killing kit has sold for $12,000. A wooden stake and 10 silver bullets, a crucifix, a pistol, and a rosary, all in a polished walnut box. In Eastern Europe in the 18th century, such kits were commonly available for travelers. Magician Harry Houdini died on Halloween 77 years ago. Back then, when the original Willows Lodge in Woodinville, Washington, was a hunting lodge, Harry Houdini asked a guest to choose one card from a deck, look at it, show it to others in the room, then replace it in the deck. It was the ace of spades. Houdini then hurled the entire deck of cards at the ceiling, and one card stuck to the ceiling, the ace of spades. And it stuck there for more than 20 years until the hunting lodge was replaced by an elegant resort hotel. Well, tonight at Willow's Lodge in Woodinville, Washington, an inner circle of Houdini historians and Houdini collectors and relatives will assemble for a Halloween seance. It will be 77 Halloweens since the one on which Houdini died. Now, Harry escaped from handcuffs, and he escaped from straitjackets and ropes and packing cases. If he can escape from death, this would be the night for him to come knocking. Politics. Governor Graylock, Washington, wants to cancel next year's presidential primary. He says it would be a waste of money on an election which has no meaning. Democrats are picking convention delegates with precinct caucuses. Among Republicans, Bush has no challengers, so why spend taxpayer money on an election which has no purpose? Argus Hamilton notes that when General Jerry Boykin declared America to be a Christian nation, only one member of Congress, Tom DeLay, dared to agree. Walter Mondale once said that God has no place in American politics, and it turned out that God felt the same way about Walter Mondale. And now, page 4. Worst lives on a rocky hilltop near Bolivar, Missouri, so she's not unaccustomed to uninvited animals. A snake in the garage, for example, is not all that big a deal. But a skunk at the kitchen door, that's off limits. You know what she did? She put a hard rock recording on her CD and turned the volume all the way up. And Pepe Le Pew took off for the next county, but not without leaving behind his opinion of Pink Floyd. On a reality TV show in Britain, 6 men competed for the affection of an attractive brunette called Miriam, only to discover that she was a he. In Concord, New Hampshire, the first openly gay Episcopal bishop will be consecrated on Sunday. V. Gene Robinson. 4,000 are converging for the ceremony, family, friends, and those opposed. Here is a strange in Miranesa village in Romania. A wanted man has been hiding for 11 years in the basement of his home. To escape an 8-year jail sentence, he had hidden under his house for 11 years. For what it's worth, passengers aboard New York's Metro North train were delayed during last evening's rush. They were delayed for most of 2 hours. And Ed Gallart of the Bronx wants you to know that he is sorry about that, but he had dropped his cell phone, and trying to retrieve it, he got his arm stuck, and firemen brought aboard had to take apart the entire toilet. Poor Harvey. Good day. Well, the rest of the story. Our country's early history seems a vast expanse of inexact boundaries and sought-after, fought-over territories, so it's difficult to imagine that as we chased the horizon, there was one territory in our path that we didn't want. It's true. In fact, for a while, we were trying to palm off this territory on another country, but the other country didn't want it. And neither did we. So for the longest time, this poor little territory was stranded, rejected, homeless. Oh, technically, it belonged to us, U.S. We just didn't want to occupy it. And those few intrepid souls who did inhabit the region, longing to belong somewhere, sent representatives in every direction. What was so bad about the place? Well, the early settlers who were wilderness shopping for land to settle, they called it a pest hole. A popular saying of that era warned others to avoid the territory, quote, the land of ills. The word means fever, and what they then called ague and chills. And when at last the territory's governor persuaded the United States government to survey the region, the surveyors arrived and they turned right around, returned home to describe the place as an endless swamp unworthy of their efforts. The weather was awful, the land was poor, interspersed with sandy areas which grew nothing. And to this, the U.S. Land Office Superintendent listened with great interest, as did many others, the President, the Congress, and heads were put together. What did the military have to say about this disagreeable region? What the military said was that it's not worth defending. And about that time, other reports were being compiled. The Morse Traveler Guide highlighted the expanses of sand, occasionally blotted by stubby trees and scanty vegetation. It was not even a nice place to visit, they said. But the territorial inhabitants, those few brave settlers who called this forsaken place home, they hung in there, and their hopes sustained for future acceptance into the Union. But that's when the going got rough. Malaria. The solitary, unfortunate United States Army outpost stationed there was forced to evacuate the region. Returning soldiers assured the folks back home that only Indians, muskrats, and bullfrogs could live where they had been. Today, you wouldn't recognize this territory, the land that once upon a time nobody wanted. In fact, if the original settlers of the region had not been so stubborn, so persistent, that territory might still be just territory. For you see, if this land were to be accepted into the Union, those first inhabitants would have to lure more settlers in. And with their previous PR, this was no easy task. But they hung in there, these few, and when they had eventually attracted a population large enough to apply for statehood, Congress turned them down. Said they had to surrender a fertile strip of territory to another state in exchange for 14,000 square miles of barren wilderness. But you know what? They accepted the terms of Congress, and today the territory that nobody wanted ranks number 8 in population, number 6 in manufacturing. Today this region is one of our most economically prosperous and geographically magnificent states. And until 1837, practically nobody wanted Michigan. The state of Michigan? The state of Michigan. Now you know the rest of the story. Gangsters need quick access. So, to avoid being caught and prosecuted for carrying concealed weapons, the Gunsels are arming the girlfriends they escort. Chicago school teachers have a tentative new contract without a strike. Chicago teachers have not staged a walkout in 16 years. Along the Atlantic coast of Florida, the surf may be unfriendly today. Wind-driven waves injured some kite surfers yesterday, and today they expect more wind, more waves. Some of those swells are dumping cargo containers off freighters. The them and us crisis in North Korea is on hold. A good source in Japan says that they and we have agreed to a meet December 10. One has to wish that the words of Palestinian President Yasser Arafat were more reliable, because sometimes he says something we'd all like to believe. This time he says, quote, Israelis have a right to live in security alongside a Palestinian state. Palestine's legislature did approve the new cabinet this morning, ending a 2-month stalemate. Tens of thousands of aging American men wanting to be young again are buying shots of testosterone. The promise is vigor and virility. The problem is it doesn't work, and it may not be safe. Duke University studies concur that the male version of menopause is andropause, and it may require treatment, but the number one safety concern is that testosterone injections may induce prostate cancer. The American Heart Association heard this morning about recent tests with Lipitor. This top-selling cholesterol drug does reduce the buildup of plaque in arteries. While several drugs on the market stop the formation of new plaque, this is the first one to demonstrate the ability to clear existing plaque. Well, we know now why our man in Iraq, Paul Bremer, made that hurry flight home yesterday. The governing council of Iraqis that we choose to run Iraq has not pleased our president with its non-performance. Members have been goofing off, spending, swaggering, traveling outside the country while street violence escalates. And we face a UN deadline, December 15, for turning Iraq over to a government of Iraqis. The governing council that we chose includes an unmanageable mix of 13 Shiites and 5 Kurds and 1 Christian and 1 Turkmen. Saddam Hussein has to be enjoying all of this tumult. Dictators say this is why dictators resort to ruthless rule. Our president's security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, says our strategy is to get more Iraqis involved in defense of their own country. Argus Hamilton says if the Iraqis could defend their own country, we wouldn't have to be over there in Baghdad. Now, page 2. New York City schools are allowing Jewish menorahs and Islamic crescents, but they are prohibiting the display of Christian nativity scenes. Scripture scholar James Kennedy's newest book is called What If America Were a Christian Nation Again? New York City schools are allowing Jewish menorahs and Islamic crescents, but prohibiting the display of Christian nativity scenes. This New York school policy will get a hearing in a Brooklyn federal court tomorrow. In New York, Garry Kasparov, #1 chess grandmaster in the world, competing with the X3D Fritz, our newest and best computer. Man against machine, the first game, had to settle for a draw. Great Lakes Naval Training Center, our nation's only boot camp for Navy enlistees, is updating itself. Less marching, more sleep, less KP, more training, and barracks with air conditioning. The chili cook-off in Terlingua, Texas, is serious competition. Prizes this year included a trophy and the engraved necklace and a hand-painted cook stove. Don Estep is a retiree from Illinois, and he had no ticket for this year's doings, but his brother, unable to attend, offered his ticket, and thus Don did get in, but now he had no chili to enter in the competition. So Don Estep made the rounds. Now listen to this. He made the rounds of all the other contestants' kettles, where each one proudly offered him a taste in a paper cup. Don't get ahead of me here. Mr. Estep saved up all of those tastes. He ate none of it. He saved it all up until he had enough chili gathered from 80 or so contestants, enough chili to mix them all together and fill a pot of his own and enter the competition. And that's right, the judges loved it. Don Estep, with his mishmash chili, won first prize. Then somebody remembered that nobody had seen the Estep fella cooking any chili, and that one question led to some other questions until he confessed the prank and returned the prizes to the runner-up, who was a Dallas dentist. Page 3. Mississippi all greet Warren Long today. He and Bernie have been married for 71 years. Trumpet players, for generations you have imagined that storing your horn in the freezer improves the tone. A Tufts University study alternately froze and thawed Bach Stradivarius trumpets for 2 days, and then each was tested by musicians of varying skill levels. Sorry. Agribusiness, Brazil has become the largest exporter of soybeans in the world. 26 million metric tons this year. China's is the world's largest buyer, 290,000 metric tons. At Wrigley Field, the Cubs were within 5 outs of going to the World Series this year when a Cub player reached into the stands to catch a foul ball, but a fan in the stands deflected the ball. And the fan who caught the ball does not want it. He'll offer it for auction December 1, and I expect the bidding could start at $5,000. A single fishing lure worth $100,000. Worth $100,000, a 10-inch hollow-bodied copper minnow made by an Ohio gunsmith in 1859, sold at auction of collectibles for $100,000. Snag that. Northwest of Pittsburgh, hundreds of people who ate at Chi-Chi's Mexican restaurant are now sick. It is hepatitis A. They do not know the specific food source. The infectious liver disease usually clears itself up in a couple of months. Actor Art Carney died Sunday at 85, buried yesterday in a small private ceremony. Art was a rare breed in Hollywood. He fought off alcoholism to become an Academy Award-winning actor, though he never took an acting lesson in his life. Seattle is embarrassed by a local nightclub serving sushi on the near-naked bodies of women, and the promoters protest that it is, quote, a form of art. In a Norwegian court, a man whose growth was stunted by illness is now 22 and only 4 feet 2. He says that he's so short that on public transportation people laugh at him. So a Norwegian court says that taxpayers must purchase a custom car built just for him. Sometimes in the middle of a Midwestern snowstorm, you have seen lightning flashes among the clouds. Actually, it's thunder snow. The National Science Foundation wants it explained. Has allocated $460,000 to the University of Missouri to see if we can use it, or at least understand it. And now, page 4. When a human heart goes into cardiac arrest, it is of the essence that there be no delay in treatment. Every 1-minute delay reduces the survival rate by 10%. So 24 cities in the United States and Canada have installed defibrillators, 1,500 of them all around town in sports facilities and shopping centers and entertainment venues and community buildings and schools. And sure enough, they called the roll this morning, and this practice has doubled the survival rate for heart attack victims. Self-government won't work without self-discipline. When somebody starts selling power wheelchairs, promising that Medicare will pay for them, government has to issue warnings, as it did this morning, that there have been $167 million worth of fraudulent claims in 20 states. The Department of Health and Human Services calls this the fastest growing scam in Medicare. And until it gets sorted out, some good guys are getting smeared along with the bad ones. Our hospitals hired 100,000 new nurses last year, the vast majority over age 50, or they were born in another country. But within 10 years, we will still need 500,000 more nurses than we will have. Would you remember the disabled elevator operator who sought Social Security payments even though her elevator had since been automated? The Supreme Court this morning ruled that people whose physical or mental disabilities allow them to do only jobs which no longer exist, those people are not entitled to financial subsidies. For what it's worth, truck driver Terry Gilmore of Ohio had his big rig on cruise control while driving on US 6 in northern Indiana. He had his semi on cruise control so that he could change clothes. Really? Now, cruise control controls the speed, but not the steering. When he crashed, his clothing was right in the middle between being off and being on. Nobody was hurt. Oh, boy, Terry Gilmore buck naked sure does slow the traffic. Poor Harvey. Good day. Go Flossie Tate. She hates housework, so Flossie worked on her father's hog and corn farm. And then during the war, she worked as a machinist. And for the last 25 years, she has worked for the Tennessee state government. Flossie Tate is now 90 and intends to work as long as she stays young. Politics, Ed Bradley, Jr. of Niceville, Florida, has a designation which he says includes all Democrats now running for president. He calls them complainers. Complainers. The talkathon on Capitol Hill continues, hour after hour through a second day. Senators trying to force a go-ahead on the confirmation of appellate court judges. Democrats are blocking the vote. Republicans are trying to filibuster them into submission. President Bush calls it shameful politics. Medical cardiologists used to tell us that your cholesterol balance is good, so you don't need medicine. Today, an increasing majority of specialists believe that LDL cholesterol should be given, well, until you drive the cholesterol level as low as possible, you should be treated. They're using the statin drugs more aggressively. Yesterday, for example, Lipitor won a statistical comparison study, but several larger studies are now in progress. The present consensus is that LDL, if possible, should be held under 100. Now, can psychological stress trigger heart attacks? Indeed. Indeed it can. In the 60 days after 9/11, hospitals reported heart attacks up as much as 30%. In the stomach of a 3-year young girl in Red Deer, Alberta, surgeons found and removed a hairball the size of a large grapefruit. And they say this can happen when children chew on their own hair. President Bush has an angry tiger by the tail. Yesterday, after 19 Italians were killed in Iraq, restlessness in Rome was revived. Before the war, opinion polls in Italy opposed it. And now some in Rome's parliament are talking pull-out. President Bush has a tiger by the tail. Where is Saddam Hussein? We do not know. The best guess of Iraqi police is that Saddam Hussein is disguised and moving about outside his hometown of Tikrit. He may still believe that his guerrilla war will discourage us, and one day his former job will be open. If Wall Street economists cannot explain this wonderful week in the stock market, maybe a country boy can help. Uphill, bulls run in spurts. And now, page 2. A beautiful day in Chicago today. A Wedgwood sky over the lapis blue lake. Yesterday was something else. Angel and I had said a last goodbye to a longtime friend. So yesterday in Chicago, it dawned foggy and soggy and sad. And forecasters were forecasting cold and blustery and bad. But in between the pug-dog ugly morning and the approaching front from the west, the thermometers and barometers and satellites told us that there would be a window of about 4 hours of sunny, warm, and beautiful. In Chicago in November, you don't waste the good stuff. Paul Jr. retrieved his golf clubs and headed for the first tee at Oak Park. I left the studio at noon, said a final prayer for Cup's family. I telescoped my indoor workout in time to get outdoors for a happy hike in the autumn leaves. There is a tree about 3 blocks from where I live. Angel and I have called it our tree since it was the size of her dainty finger. It's always the first maple to turn 18-karat gold every autumn. That tree is bigger than my belt size now, but the passage from summer to fall is softened still by a daily glimpse of that lovely landmark. Park Avenue in our River Forest suburb is a miles-long nave of arching elm and maple and oak, lawns shaded by evergreen and spruce and flowering shrubs, and carpeted by neatly raked into piles leaves for professional pickup. Well, I'm not halfway through what I vainly call my power walk, circling the campus of Dominican University, when suddenly the weatherman throws Denver at us. More than an hour prematurely. The playful wind is tossing leaves where Paul Harvey can chase them on the run and catch him in his teeth in a game I hadn't played since grade school. But the playful wind escalates fast until it is denuding trees and rescattering the accumulation of raked leaves, green and yellow and red and gold. And it's about this time that the weather forecaster's instruments just threw up their hands, having measured gusts over 5 states that were flirting with hurricane velocity. The temperature is plummeting. Power poles are pulling up or falling down in nations like neighboring states like Michigan. Paul Jr., I later learned, saw his drive on the 12th tee climb into the clouds and disappear over Indiana. It's a Titleist ball with a logo that says the rest of the story. Finders keepers. I'm still kicking falling leaves and catching some. The neighbors are calling out to neighbors how beautiful is this final swirl of autumn colors. An hour and a shower and a shave later, Angel has candles on the table. Gershwin music is drowning out the wind beyond the windows, and I'm giving thanks for everything. I didn't know where to start. I couldn't know where to finish, so I just said for everything. Page 3.
Attention.
Worth requoting is by Wally Hickel, who has always had a succinct way of uncomplicating things. He said, God is not on trial. The Supreme Court is. Shop talk, when will the media get the message? Tuesday night on television, everything else was eclipsed in the ratings by Andy Griffith and the Mayberry family. It had 21.5 million viewers, twice as many as its closest competitor. New varieties of super sweet corn derived from genetic engineering. Those opposed to altering the genes of corn are too late. Ancient Americans were doing it 4,000 years ago. The oldest person in the world has died at 114, Japanese, Mitoyo Kawate. The oldest woman was a Japanese, 114. What do you suppose the Japanese know that we don't? Fish, I would guess. Slenderizing seafood. In our Tournament of Roses, we have a couple in Pinellas Park, Florida, who have been married 70 years today. Vera and Pete Ray. Arizona jurors are getting tougher, sending a lot more killers to death now than 1 year ago. Jurors are much tougher than judges were. Be interesting to see how this affects the crime rate in that state. The post office on Mount Olive Avenue in Burbank, California is being renamed for Bob Hope. And Rush Limbaugh resumes his regular broadcasts on Monday. His brother says the first 5 weeks phase of his treatment have been completed. The United States Conference on Catholic Bishops voted 234 to 3. Same-sex marriages are not entitled to traditional legal benefits. John Mellencamp says anybody can write rock music. That's what he said. He told an Indiana U class in music history to go home and start writing. He says anybody can. Federal government statisticians are frequently discredited by their own numbers. It's happened again today. Our government guesstimates the scallop population between Virginia and Canada, and the government was quite wrong. An expanded non-government survey says the population is double what the government computed. And now page 4, when after the fact, in Clarion, Pennsylvania, a university student who killed her newborn son and left him in a dormitory dumpster, Karen Mako, could have got 10 years in jail, got 9 months. A French-style men's suit maker in eastern China is trying to hire former President Bill Clinton to advertise his suits. They say that he, Clinton, has character and worldwide charisma. The director of the Municipal Symphony in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, for his opening night audience, reworked Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, reworked the score rather radically. When he took his bow, the audience booed. But he, I guess you could say, had the last word. Conductor Gerald Thomas turned his back and dropped his pants and mooned the audience. Oh, that they applauded. For what it's worth, don't leave your cat alone without food and water. Rhonda McIntyre in North Sydney, Australia did. She left her cat without food and water, and her cat meowed so loudly that it alerted neighbors, who telephoned the RSPCA, and the humane officials called the police, and the police found the cranky cat in a brightly lighted basement surrounded by $100,000 worth of marijuana plants. Paul Harvey. Good day. 108 million Americans will receive tax refunds. Each will receive an average $2,500. That's 20%. No, that's 27% more than this year's refund. The marathon debate in the United States Senate changed nothing. After 40 hours of talk, not even one of President Bush's judicial nominees was given the courtesy of an up or down vote. Republicans in both the Senate and the House, the Republican majority in both houses has agreed on massive energy legislation. Retail sales were down a little bit in October, down 0.3. We can hope that some of the people who were not buying more stuff were paying off credit card debt, because that would be good for them and good for our economy. Wholesale prices posted their biggest increase in 7 months, relating mostly to the introduction of new model cars. The Joint Economic Committee of the United States Congress reports that our nation's economy is both growing and improving, and significantly. A dues-paying American can marry an illegal immigrant. Did you know that? An illegal immigrant immediately upon marriage becomes eligible for a green card and other benefits. In New York, Desiree Cortez admits that she has married 27 times that way and for that reason. She married men from Ecuador, Colombia, Pakistan, Peru, Mexico, Dominican Republic, some she can't even remember. But they were all illegal, and she made them legal by marrying them. Stay in line, fellas, because Desiree is going to jail, but just for 6 months. Well, wash your ears out with this. Philip Dobson of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, when he heard that a home was being sold for unpaid taxes, he bought the house in 40 acres for $15,000. But when he learned that the elderly widow woman who had been evicted had lived there more than 5 decades, He paid the taxes and gave her back her house. Now it can be told, 2 years ago, Florence, Italy, there was to be a summit meeting attended by world leaders. All present were closely guarded by security personnel. One delegate to the proceedings had brought his grandson. After both had been frustrated by limitations on their activities, the grandson said, "Grandpapa, let's escape." And his grandpapa said, "All right, let's." Together they escaped. From a washroom, they ducked into a stairwell, made their way to the rooftop, and then the two of them ran like everything, jumping from one rooftop to the next, and from the next to the next. They cavorted outside of their compound for more than an hour before they returned and gave themselves up. Grandpapa is now confessing. Grandpapa was and is Jean Chrétien, the Prime Minister of Canada. Now, page 2. For the first time in the United States, somebody has died from having been bitten by a rabid raccoon. 25-year young man in northern Virginia. The hepatitis outbreak in western Pennsylvania has not yet been traced to its source. Presently suspect are green onions. The twin Egyptian boys who were joined at the tops of their heads, separated by surgeons in Dallas a month ago, they are surprising everybody with their remarkable improvement. Paralyzed Superman Christopher Reeve has a device implanted in his chest now, which allows him to breathe for extended periods without a ventilator. He'll demonstrate it on ABC's 2020. Oh, numismatists, a Chalmers coin has been found in Annapolis, Maryland. You know, in colonial America, we made our own money. In the 1780s, at number 10 Cornwall Street, John Chalmers made some of our nation's first coins. Excavators at number 10 have uncovered this treasure, a threepence, only half the size of today's penny. You've heard that hotel heiress Paris Hilton performed in a pornographic video. The man seen having sex with her in that video says that the Hilton family is now trying to portray him as a criminal, so he wants $10 million for damages to his reputation. Here is a woman that we're going to call Jane, and her husband have 3 sons. One needed a kidney transplant. Jane and her husband went to the hospital to be checked for compatibility. The doctors reported that Jane and her sons were not related. Somehow, they said, Jane had given birth to somebody else's children. Well, the New England Journal of Medicine has unraveled this strange relationship for them and for us. Jane is a chimera, C-H-I-M-E-R-A, a chimera, a mixture of 2 individuals, 2 non-identical twin sisters. Their cells intermingled in the womb and grew into one person. The cells from only one twin ate Jane's blood. In her other tissues are cells from both living amicably side by side. Nobody knows how many chimeras there are in the world. Most of them live out their lives unaware. Medical history records only 30. Page 3. Secretary Rumsfeld today in Japan publicly vows that the United States will outlast any opposition to our Iraq attacks. Implicit in what he does not say today is that the United States has troops in 40 other countries helping other nations defend themselves. We can call our forces home and leave them to sweat. South Korea, which owes its life to us, has been reluctant to help us, may soon see some shrinkage in American defense forces there. Secretary Rumsfeld acknowledges that we may be shuffling others of our overseas forces, that static defenses are going out of style anyway. Gas explosion in another coal mine in China killed another 40 or so miners. In China just this year, underground explosions and fires and cave-ins have cost the lives of more than 4,000 miners just this year. Oh, say, Olive and Mark Weaver in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, have been married 74 years today. Agribusiness, the Cotelco family of Vegreville, Alberta, have raised cattle for 20 years. Their feedlot is home for 36,000 head, producing 36,000 tons of manure every year. By this time next year, Mr. Bern Kotelko will be turning that manure into enough electricity to light up 3 towns. The methane gas will run generators which produce the power. Less odor, less greenhouse gas emission, more valuable byproducts. Oh, you've heard allegations and some confessions that 5 to 7% of professional baseball players use performance-enhancing drugs. Anyway, starting next year, steroid users in baseball will be fined and or suspended. A girl 14 appeared on the Maury Povich TV show. Afterwards, she says, a man claiming to be the show's limousine driver raped her. She is suing the show and the host for $25 million. The government of Fiji wants to take back the island's beaches and reefs and coral lagoons to allow Fijians to swim and fish and dive and enjoy the surf and picnic. The tourism industry is aghast. How dare they? Did you hear about the motorist in Madrid, Spain, had his cell phone up to her? When the cop stopped him, he had his cell phone up to his ear. The motorist is not talking, he was scratching an itch. The motorist is a lawyer. The officers put 1 and 1 together, and they fined him $70 anyway. Now, page 4. 1965, Minneapolis this time of year has hosted our nation's #1 snow ski show. Gradually recent years, downhill skiing and snowboarding devolved in favor of machine-driven recreation. So this year's show is all about sit-down snowmobiles and such. Not even 1 pair of skis on display. Square foot booth space is too pricey for anything that's not supercharged. In Colfax, Illinois, the town council mandated that all village employees be subject to random mandatory drug testing. All village employees. Then somebody reminded the village board members that they are village employees, so they promptly rewrote the law to exempt themselves. Oh, for what it's worth, GI jet jockeys, how would you like to be the Dutch F-16 pilot on NATO exercises in Norway who mistakenly dropped a bomb 400 feet from 3 military observers? The international NATO observers have been offered counseling when they stop shaking. Paul Harvey, good day. The rest of the story. Neither Eli nor Mortimer said a word. They were driving past the city limits, on toward the dark woods outside town. When they found a secluded spot, both of them got out of the car, and Eli stared into Mortimer's eyes, and he said, I didn't want it to end this way. But he sighed, I can't take care of you anymore. I can barely feed myself. Obvious as it ought to have been, now for the first time, Mortimer appeared to realize that something was terribly wrong. He looked around him, then up into the looming tree branches, then back into the face of the man who'd found him orphaned and hungry, who had fed him and loved him. Both were quiet for a minute or two as bittersweet memories chased one another, leading back to the day that they'd first met. Eli, the failing businessman, and Mortimer, the mouse? A mouse. Advertising is a tough competitive industry to begin with, especially if you're not cut out for it, and Eli was just about to decide that he was not cut out for it. Then one day a stranger wandered into his shabby office, a little gray field mouse who, with a boldness atypical of its kind, clambered up and onto the desk where Eli was working. Well, Eli had been nursing a cheese sandwich most of the afternoon. He could spare a little, he supposed. So he pinched a tiny chunk of cheddar between his fingers, and he held it out and said, come on, fella, you got to work for it. And what do you know, the tiny creature, cautiously at first, leaned forward, sniffed the air excitedly, and then inch by courageous inch, drew nearer the cheese until he was close enough to snatch it from Eli's grasp. The ad man laughed aloud. His little visitor was so tame. Might he have been someone's pet? Well, if not, he certainly was now. For each day thereafter, the mouse ventured forth from a crack in the wall and climbed up on Eli's desk for a bite of cheese. Became so trusting as time went on that he often curled up in the palm of Eli's hand and went to sleep. And then after a while, the mouse whom Eli named Mortimer would wake up and scamper away. For Eli, the hard times grew harder. So hard that his shirt sleeves were frayed and the soles of his shoes were flopping. So hard that he could no longer even afford the cheese sandwich that had sustained him until his supper of cold beans. And yet there, disheveled and discouraged and on the brink of bankruptcy, his first concern was for Mortimer. For there was a restaurant downstairs, a restaurant whose owner baited his mousetraps with the same cheese that Eli could no longer afford to share. And that's when Eli decided to take Mortimer to the woods, to the edge of town, where he'd be safe.